We affirm, and contention 1 is saving Medicare. High drug prices are driving Medicare to collapse. Bushman of UCSD in 2018 finds that a sixth of Medicare's expanding budget is used to pay for prescription drugs, a proportion that is increasing by the year. As such, Rother, the CSP in 2015 finds that perhaps the most worrisome threat to the survival of Medicare is the price of specialty pharmaceuticals. Fortunately, because price controls would decrease the price of drugs Medicare has to subsidize, Baker of the Center for Economic Research in 2012 finds that price controls would save federal Medicare budgets $541 billion over the next decade. This is vital as on its track, Moose of the Weekly Standard in 2018 explains that by 2026, Medicare will be unable to pay scheduled benefits to seniors. The collapse of Medicare would be disastrous. Baker of US News in 2015 finds that by serving as a lifeline for healthcare costs, Medicare has reduced the percentage of seniors living in poverty by 2/3. Furthermore, Card of UC Berkeley in 2009 finds that by expanding healthcare coverage, Medicare reduces mortality for the severely ill by 20%. Contention 2 is accessibility. Subpoint A is a better prescription. Currently, Kunang of CNN in 2015 writes that Americans pay 2 to 6 times more than the rest of the world for prescription drugs. This trend is worsening as a congressional report in 2018 found that drug prices are soaring at 10 times the rate of inflation. The Court of Market Watch in 2018 furthers that even generic drugs are seeing price spikes by over 100%. As a result, Lupkin of Vice in 2015 quantifies that 1 in 5 Americans cannot afford to fill their prescriptions, totaling 35 million people. Fortunately, Lazarus of the LA Times in 2017 finds that price controls set a cap at which drug companies can sell their drugs, empirically reducing the prices of drugs in other countries. As such, Vandergraan of the NCBI in 2017 reports that a plausible decrease in drugs by 20% would increase the number of users who can afford drugs by 23%. This allows prescriptions to be followed, preventing non-adherence. Resnick of Health Analytics in 2017 finds that the high cost of prescription drugs is the primary cost of non-adherence, with 94% of people with incomes under $25,000 unable to fill their prescriptions specifically due to cost. Non-adherence is harmful for 2 reasons. First is mortality. Benjamin of the NCBI in 2012 finds that medical non-adherence is responsible for 125,000 deaths in the US per year as patients cannot take life-saving drugs. Second is poverty. Resnick furthers that non-adherence costs nearly $10,000 per person due to unnecessary hospitalizations. Unfortunately, Weissman of Slate in 2015 quantifies that healthcare costs push 11 million Americans into poverty every year. Subpoint B is mitigating the opioid crisis. Lau of Stat News in 2017 finds that opioids could kill as many as 500,000 Americans over the next decade as overdose rates climb. While the Associated Press in 2018 finds that prescriptions for opioids have seen the largest reduction in 25 years, illegal opioids have filled the void. Specifically, Room of UVA in 2018 finds that since 2010, deaths from prescription opioids have leveled off, while illegal opioid deaths have skyrocketed. However, a cure exists, as Burke of the University of Pittsburgh in 2018 finds that naloxone, a drug patented in 1961, is near miraculous in reversing opioid overdoses within minutes. Unfortunately, Burke furthers that naloxone has seen a 150-fold increase in price due to monopolization. As a result, McFadden of the Associated Press in 2018 finds that the high prices of naloxone have strapped city budgets in American cities, putting hundreds of lives at risk. In response, McFadden finds that officials have called on the Trump administration to control the price of naloxone. Increasing municipal access to naloxone would stem America's opioid epidemic. A 2017 NBER study found that current state laws that expand access to naloxone reduce overdose fatalities by 11% as city officials can more effectively administer life-saving doses. Burke concludes that widespread access to naloxone could prevent some, if not all, of the 115 daily opioid overdose deaths in the United States. Thus we affirm.
Can I see there's evidence or something that's 94% don't fill because of cost? start prep. Okay.
How much is it?
It was 13 seconds used.
Ardrey Kell negates and contention 1 is impeding the development of new medicines. Price controls decrease innovation by pharmaceutical companies for 2 reasons. The first is decreasing R&D. And the status quo, companies spend a significant portion of their budgets on research and development. Dunn of Biopharmative reports in 2017 that total R&D spending totals $71.4 billion, and on average, companies spend roughly 1/5 of their budgets on it. However, price controls would change this. Limiting the profitability of drugs would disincentivize research of many drugs because bringing a new drug to the market is extremely expensive and risky. Sullivan of Policy Med reports in 2018 that bringing a new drug to the market costs about $2.6 billion and only about 12% of drugs get approved. For this reason, Easton of Stat News finds that even the most modest price controls in comparison to others found around the globe force pharmaceutical companies to cut their R&D budgets by at least 80% in an attempt to maintain profitability. The second reason is decreasing investor confidence. Price controls threaten the potential returns investors stand to make on their investments, thus making them more hesitant to invest. This empirically has been true in the United States in the past. Boss of Milliman explains in 2009 that the mere threat of price controls on pharmaceuticals has a severe impact on investor confidence. For example, in 1993, when the Clinton administration proposed a plan that would cap the price of drugs, the market value of pharmaceutical firms plunged and overall R&D spending went down by billions. A significant reduction in investment will reduce the amount of research companies can conduct due to a lack of capital. The impact of impeding the development of new drugs is increasing mortality. Decreasing R&D spending would sharply decrease the amount of innovation of new medicines, which is problematic because new medicines have been extremely successful in reducing mortality. Lichtenberg of the NBER in 2012 quantifies 73% of the actual increase in life expectancy in recent years can be solely attributed to innovation in the pharmaceutical sector. Contention 2 is a global crisis. If the United States were to place price controls on the pharmaceutical industry, it would have unintended side effects worldwide. In the status quo, the United States consumers pay more for medication than their international counterparts. Graham of Digital Journal reports in 2015 that United States prices are consistently higher than those in other countries for a wide range of drugs. Mello of Stanford continues in 2018 that because American consumers pay so much, our pharmaceutical companies are more able and willing to grant price concessions elsewhere, including outright donations of critical medicines to developing countries. Because of this, Sapphire of the New York Times explains in 2003 that in this way, United States consumers effectively subsidize R&D that goes on to help the rest of the world. As a result, Ford of the Journal of Tropical Medicine and International Health finds in 2001 that prices in developing countries are 1 to 5% of what they are in Western markets. Price controls would change this, as Mello continues that price restrictions would likely cause prices to balloon elsewhere to make up the money. Because of this, Gene Landau of the CGD in 2005 concludes, price controls lower the probability that new pharmaceuticals reach consumers in lower income countries by about 30%. The impact is increasing mortality. Price controls, by decreasing profits, decrease the incentive for companies to invest in more gratuitous medicines, such as vaccines for the developing world. That's problematic, as the world is vastly dependent on United States drugs. For example, Tefo Phage of the United Nations explains that in Africa, only 2% of drugs consumed are produced domestically. Thus, any fluctuation in supply could have huge ramifications. Fortunately, according to World Stop Exports in 2017, the United States is currently one of the biggest exporters of drugs to other countries. This has saved countless lives. As Alex Berzal of the ACSH in 2016 quantifies, from 2000 to 2015, new developments in medicine has saved the lives of 20.3 million people in the developing world, even more people in other countries. And because affirming risks the health of everyone now and in the future, we urge you to negate.
So what is the main incentive driving pharmaceutical companies' actions?
What do you mean? The main incentive?
Yeah, the main motivation.
Profit.
Okay, so what profit do they get from sending vaccines to the developing world?
It's still profit. Like, they still have a market there and they still make money from it.
But it's only 1% of what they make in the rest of the world?
No, I'm saying
That's
the
what
price.
you said.
Yeah, I'm saying the price is there.
Okay, so are they selling it to more people?
Yeah, like there's a market there. There's money that can be made selling at that price. They know like they can't sell
So
it.
how
So
much?
you can't sell an American price in the developing world.
Yeah, okay,
There's
that
still a
makes sense,
price
sure.
that you can sell at that can
So
still
how
make
much?
money.
How much would the prices go up if they can't sell at a higher price because of?
No, it's not just price. So I can't tell you exactly how much prices go up, but I can tell you the supply would likely go down. Because if I'm crunched for money, like I'm obviously going to take my resources that I have left and focus them in things that maximize my profits.
All right.
That'll be my argument.
So it doesn't maximize profits to go into the developing world.
What do you mean?
They don't get a lot of money from going
No, they
to the
still
developing
do.
world.
I'm saying that if I'm stretched for resources, though, I'm going to focus them in things that make me the absolute most money, but the developing world still makes them money, so they do. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So talking about your first contention,
Yeah.
you tell me from Baker that price control would save 540 million.
Mhm.
So like
Billion.
billion. So like which piece of evidence says that reaches the bright line by which Medicare doesn't collapse? Like how much do they need to save for Medicare to
Well,
not collapse?
$540 billion is a lot of money for
But like
Medicare.
when like how much do they need to
Well,
save?
we're
for
saying,
Medicare
I
to
mean,
collapse?
we just extend the time period of Medicare,
So,
like
like,
being
how
able
long?
to. I mean, it's obviously impossible. I could make up a year if you want.
A year? So like you don't know. So you don't know how like. So you don't know.
I mean, obviously, like no one knows the exact
Okay.
numbers of anything.
Okay, so
All right. So back to your second contention. So you say that the U.S. companies have to increase their prices in the rest of the world outside of the U.S. market, right, to make up for profits lost.
if you do that, they decrease the supply.
Okay. So why does that mean they go to the developing world and decrease supply, and not decrease supply to the rest of the world?
Because for the rest of the world, developing countries, they can charge at a higher price. In the developing world, you cannot charge at a higher price.
What do you mean? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so in the developing world, you cannot charge the exorbitantly high prices that you charge in America and other places.
So the only thing that changes is the amount of drugs being sent over.
Not necessarily. Things like I say things like donations would change too, the amount of the supply.
So what is their incentive to
And, like,
donate? Because donates inherently have no profit value.
Not necessarily.
What? How do you
Well,
make
actually,
money
yeah.
from donating?
Well, yeah. So like I'm assuming like the things about donations would be like there's like tax incentives, things like that too. But once again, like,
So you're saying that they donate to make money?
no, I'm saying that there are tax incentives for that too.
So why are they donating right now?
I just said tax incentives.
Yes, to make money through tax deductions.
Not necessarily.
Then why do they do tax deductions if not to make money?
Because like when you crunch your numbers, I'm assuming that there's going to come a point where like even with the tax deduction, it still might not be profitable for them to donate. So
Okay.
like let's say like the tax deduction gives me X amount to produce the medicine
so
and to get it there.
which-
It also costs X
Which
amount.
U.S.
of money.
companies are doing like philanthropy in the developing world?
I don't know. You tell me.
I can't name any because the companies that are doing that are like GSK, which is British, like Sanofi, which is French. In your case, it's specific to U.S.
Well, yeah,
companies.
our evidence definitely indicates that United
But
States.
can you like I can't even.
If
name
you really want me
one
to, I can
big
like go
one.
and read like my PDFs and like find a couple.
I mean, can you give me one example of any type of philanthropy
Then I know you're trying to like one type of philanthropy, like yes,
by U.S. companies?
yeah, like our
What is
prices are 1 to 5% lower there than they are, like 1 to 5% what they are here. So like I don't know like what business is doing that, like holistically across all companies. That's what our prices are.
Can I see the land job events?
Yeah.
Okay, is everyone ready? My opponent's entire case hinges on the idea that pharmaceutical revenue will go down by a significant amount if price controls are implemented, because in their first contention, there will still be R&D in the long term if revenues remain slightly the same, and on their second contention, if revenues remain around the same, there's no incentive to change any donation patterns. Here's why this really ends around, because Aborn of Harvard University in 2016 explains is that in the status quo, the amount that they're charging for drugs in the United States is pegged to what they think the market can bear. So they're maximizing profits, and it's not about the R&D costs or developing country costs, which is why Levy 11 of the Journal of Economic Research finds that even with a 20% decrease in the price of drugs, revenue of pharmaceutical companies will only decrease by 1% because overall more people can access the drug, which means that overall the pharmaceutical companies are still okay. At the end of this round, we're going to prove to you that accessibility to things like opioid drugs will increase in the affirmative world, which means overall pharmaceutical companies are still doing okay. Let's go to their first contention, which discusses new medicine. The first thing they talk about is decreased R&D, but the problem with my opponent's case is that it's happening right now. What Bala of the MSR in 2014 explains is that there's been a long trend of decreasing R&D in the pharmaceutical sector, and they're pulling out of the projects that they need, that the U.S. people need. The reason is quite simple. In the status quo, as they say, it's becoming harder and harder to find new drugs, so they have little incentive to continue doing it. And what Stotts of the IPR in 2017 explains is that R&D budgets will be non-profitable by 2020, which means that my opponents are supporting a system that's done in a couple of years. But second, we would say that there's still always going to be incentive to do R&D, even if there was a decrease in revenue, because Hobson's 12, the FGCA explains that each R&D investments have a 50% tax deduction with these pharmaceutical companies, so instead of spending the money elsewhere, they'll spend it on R&D. On their second point about investor confidence, we would say that it's incredibly short-term impact. Threats on the pharmaceutical companies happening in 1993, and they're happening right now under bipartisan support from Democrats and Republicans. So there's always going to be some threat on the pharmaceutical industry. Only after you actually implement price controls can they go back to these certain investments that they can. Investor confidence is a very short-term issue. But on their impact, they say there's a lot of innovation due to pharmaceuticals. But Light 15 of the University of New Jersey explains is that most innovation in the status quo of 90% has little to no actual therapeutic value. But Kanoi explains that the reason is because they have no incentive to create drugs that are actually going to help a lot of the United States population. They just make small manipulations to maximize profit. But if you make the price controls, you add value-based pricing, which means that the price of drugs for the best drugs is going to be higher than the price of these Me Too drugs, which is why Kanoi finds that it's going to be better innovation if you have price controls. On their second contention, when they discuss the global crisis, the first issue with this argument is that they are mischaracterizing what is actually happening in the developing world. What a report from UPenn in 2012 explains is that pharmaceutical companies across the world are all about profits. They have no incentive to actually donate for free because they can always make more money in the developing world. And let's see why this actually breaks down their case. The first issue comes from the World Health Organization in 2012, who explains that all major pharmaceutical donations are actually ineffective because A, they're using expired drugs, and B, they're sending it into countries that can't even read the labels of what the drugs actually are. The reasoning is quite simple. He himself says in First Crossfire that they get donations that they send these drugs out, so when they have a surplus of drugs in the developed world, they just send it to the developing world with little to no cost to them. But second, this comes from Bolshard, the scientist in 2000, who explains that by giving away free drugs in the developing world, they increase their market share and eventually are able to monopolize the market in the long term, and you've already seen this across Africa. And what Weinstein in 2011 explains is that in monopolized countries, 90% of per capita income is directed towards solving for drug fees, which means that they're pushing millions into poverty in the long term. Maybe in the short term, these donations are good, but in the long term, they certainly harm everyone. But then their Landau evidence about decreasing the launch of drugs in developing countries is if a price control was enacted in a developing country, not a price control in the United States. Awful evidence. But then, according to Schweitzer of Health Affairs in 2011, the reason why prices are lower in developing countries is to maximize profits, because that means more people can afford them. In fact, in India, they only decrease prices so that the top 1.5% of Indians can afford it, which ultimately increases access. But at the end of the day, the Access to Medicine Index done by the World Health Organization finds that affordability in developing countries for medicine has not moved a bit in the past few years, and the reasoning is simple. Even if there are short-term benefits, in the long term they are crowded out by pharmaceuticals' ulterior motives.
Is everyone good? Yeah. Good. Start off at the top of my opponent's case on their first contention about Medicare. Realize that Medicare covers more than just pharmaceutical prices. There are things like surgeries, procedures, and visits that they also cover. That's why Schweitzer of UCLA in 2018 finds that there will be trade-offs with quality in treatment administered under Medicare with lower prices for pharmaceuticals. He explains that the increased cost of surgeries and hospitalization would offset the losses made with lower pharmaceutical prices. That's why Wright of the CSU in 2013 explains that for every $1 increase in innovation, there is a $7.20 decrease in actual overall healthcare costs. That's important because when you increase preventative measures, you increase the effectiveness of these measures before it has to go towards hospitalization or surgery. You prevent long-term, high-level costs, which makes it cheaper overall. Solve back for this, you solve back for the mortality, and you decrease the long-term costs. Then, let's go into my opponent's second contention on accountability, or on accessibility. First, on prescriptions, realize that there are two different ways that the status quo is solving back right now. First, through middlemen. This comes from Isle of U. Rochester in 2018, who explains that PBMs, or middlemen who negotiate with pharmaceutical companies, actually decrease the market level entry price for drugs. And he concludes that the average PBM decreases the price of entry drugs by 50%. That's really important because these PBMs cover 95% of insured Americans, a large swath of the population. But secondly, even outside of insurance, there's going to be increasing patent competition from generics. That comes to the ACJ in 2018 explains that because of increased market penetration after the patent cliff of 2016, over 3,800 generics in 2019 will see a fall in drastic prices. That's why Easton of Harvard in 2017 explains that generics by 2030 will on average decrease their price by 50%, making it more accessible for individuals even when they don't have healthcare. That means they can go get accessibility for these drugs even if they aren't part of this institution. That's really important because first, we solve back for the mortality that they speak of, but secondly on poverty, because we make these drugs cheaper, low-income individuals are able to afford it. However, just making these drugs more affordable doesn't mean that low-income individuals will be able to buy all of the prescriptions they need, and this is for a couple of reasons. First, because they don't get long-term care. In a lot of areas, because these low-income individuals cannot afford regular physician visits, they don't go towards hospitals until it's too late. They say that this lack of preventative care makes a lot of minorities end up in emergency rooms rather than doctors' offices. That's really important because emergency rooms where they get the majority of their care isn't a long-term solvency. They get released and they don't go back until the next issue arises. But secondly, because they don't have this long-term access to medicine, there is lower medical literacy rates within those communities. That's why a lot of Americans don't adhere, because they don't actually get meet with their doctors, which means that they don't have the resources available to continue taking their medication. They don't have the know-how or the knowledge or even the guidance from a medical professional. But then, at the end of the day, realize that there is an increasing amount of minority representation within the low-income population. That's why Pharma Times in 2017 explains that the greatest barrier in the next 10 years to minorities and low-income individuals getting access to medicine is going to be the growing language barrier gap between medical professionals and the growing Hispanic population within the United States. At that point, they need to solve for these gaps before they can just throw money at the problem and let people get medication that's sitting on the shelves. Then, let's go into my opponent's subpoint P on opioids. There are three main responses here. First, Overton of the Press Herald in 2017 explains that right now there is a huge crackdown on legal prescriptions of painkillers. He explains that because the access to these prescription painkillers has gotten so difficult, more people have been pushed into the illegal market where substances are more dangerous without any attention on reform. But the solvency here already exists in the status quo, because Myers of USA Today in 2017 explains that for individuals who have insurance, naloxone is covered by companies, it is free. And for individuals in households that don't have insurance and are below $100,000, they get free donations. He says the only way that they can justify those donations is with the high cost for buyers, so that way they can subsidize that going forward. That means that right now we're already solving back. Naloxone, even if it's higher, is still getting to the individuals that need it the most. Don't let them fool you about the opioid crisis.
We're gonna take some prep time. It was like 10 seconds. Okay. So on opioids, you say that individuals who have insurance have naloxone covered, right?
It's not just individuals with insurance. Individuals with insurance have naloxone covered, and individuals in households without insurance and below $100,000, where a lot of the opioid crisis is centered in low-income areas, also get access to naloxone.
So what about cities?
Okay, so this is households, like individuals who live within any.
So your evidence has nothing to do with municipal budgets for naloxone. Right?
Okay, so municipal budgets for naloxone aren't necessary when individuals still have access, but also the second response I make is that naloxone is donated in large quantities to first responders in those municipalities.
Yeah, and
the reason they do that is because of the large budget they have right now.
And we're saying that clearly isn't enough at the point where those first responders are saying we need to reduce the price. But also the key is that even if individuals get access, if they overdose, they can't use a drug on themselves. You need first responders and city officials to have.
First responders still have access, but two, other people have access commonly because it's free. That's why you see bystanders are able to step up and intervene. But more importantly, we spent a minute and 3 seconds on this. Can I ask you a question? Okay, so on your case on prescriptions, right? You say that we've seen an increase in price of generics.
Yeah.
So for those generics, what industry or what area of the pharmaceutical fields are increasing?
What do you mean?
So where are the generic prices higher right now?
They're higher in the products that make the companies the most profits. So.
Okay, so those are in highly specialized fields where there are very few competitors. How do you increase competition in the pharmaceutical industry?
Here's why that's not true. The reason why generics prices will continue to increase, which opposes your evidence, is because pharmaceutical companies, 4 or 5 of them, work together to keep the price of generics.
Pharmaceutical companies can work together, but that's only if they have exclusive market control. After the patent cliff of 2016, in which like a lot of different generic companies were able to get access to the market. Where did they move into?
No, you're missing the point here. Like, I
Since
agree that-
2016, there's been an
Calvin,
increase in specialized generics.
I understand.
At that point, is that
I
not more
understand.
competition with
No,
high-level
no,
name brand drugs?
Because what I'm saying is that even if competition increases, when the people are working together, when the organizations, the generic manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies are working together to keep
So-
the price high, it doesn't matter
One,
if there's more people in the field.
That's on the assumption that there are multiple companies within a certain field. Right now, they're highly specialized, right? Like,
No.
one company dominates one part of the market, another dominates the
I would
other.
say that's just not true.
When that patent runs out, that increases
No, you're just saying
competition.
things that aren't true.
Honestly, we're getting nowhere at some point. Do you mind if I ask another question? Do you want one?
I'll ask the question.
Sure.
So, when you talk, your response to Medicare, right, is essentially like with new drugs, you decrease the cost of overall healthcare, right?
So, yes, every dollar in innovation empirically decreases overall healthcare costs by $7.20.
So that relies on the fact that the new drugs we are creating are actually effective, right?
One, we still say that we get access to effectiveness,
Yeah.
but two, on the idea of effectiveness, we say that these like small companies that are now moving into competitive markets
Small
increase the
companies?
efficacy.
That was not
Yeah,
the
like,
case
I
at
mean,
all. Or-
generics are oftentimes coming from a lot of small companies as well.
Yeah,
Like, we can
that's just-
flesh that out later in the round, that's just semantics.
135 total start.
So it's gonna be our case first, starting with the first contention. Is everybody ready? Okay. In response to our first contention, they tell you that healthcare costs go down because more innovation, but they drop the response as Sneaker's rebuttal that tells you that 90% of new drugs being created right now have no market or no value in terms of actually helping people, which is why innovation is not actually doing anything in the status quo. The only way that changes the response is like the turn the Sneaker's rebuttal, which tells you that like when pricing controls are instituted, there's value-based pricing, which means that the drugs that help the most amount of people are more, there's more incentive to make them, which is why we get our impact, which is a 20% decrease in mortality of senior citizens. At that point, let's go to the main place you vote for us, which is our subpoint B about the opioid crisis on contention 2. They give one response in rebuttal. Their response is that citizens have access, but that's not important. What we tell you is that the only thing that matters is if paramedics and city officials have access on college campuses and in cities. That's really true. That's really true because people don't buy naloxone planning on overdosing. They need actual paramedics to have it in terms of an emergency. That's why they're asking for a decrease in prices right now, and that's why 500,000 people are dying in the status quo because of the opioid crisis. What we tell you, when you decrease prices, municipalities can get more access to this life-saving drug, which could save the 115 people that are dying each day because of the opioid crisis. So is their case on probability, because we're telling you that there's a 100% probability that an increase in access to naloxone decreases the people that are dying of the opioid crisis. But in their case, in their second contention, there's a long link chain of drugs going here, and that setting up infrastructure, the link chain is very long and unclear. At that point, let's go to their case. The first thing that takes away all their offense is the overview, which is also not responded to a rebuttal. The overview tells you that revenue will not go down because you're increasing the market share, which shows that even if the prices go down, more people are buying those drugs, which means that revenue only goes down by 1%, taking out both their contentions. But then, let's go down to their second contention, where they talk about the global crisis. The UPenn evidence specifically tells you that pharma is all about profits. However, we turn this case in two ways. First of all, is the World Health Organization evidence, which shows that all donations regulations are actually bad, but second of all, and more importantly, is the Bouchard evidence which turns this argument because it tells that even if there's short-term benefits, the companies are just going into the developing world to set up monopolies in the long term, which is why overall the Access to Medicine Index specifically tells you that there's been no increase in affordability of drugs in the developing world because of U.S. actions. Their argument is empirically true, and the link chain is very long and murky.
We're gonna take break. Good. That was about 11 to 12, so it's a minute 25 total.
I'm starting on Medicare. On Medicare, we tell you that innovation drives down overall healthcare costs. They tell you that, well, 90% of innovation has no value, but that's not true. Because the Lichtenberg evidence, the bottom of our first contention tells you that in the status quo, 73% of the recent increase in life expectancy can be attributed to status quo innovation in the American pharmaceuticals. That's not responsible. But also, we tell you that you trade off with other things. So even if these Medicare become drugs become cheaper, we tell you things like surgeries, procedures, and visits become more expensive. At the end of the day, in first crossfire, Danny cannot tell me how much we delay this inevitable collapse. Go to their opioids argument. What we tell you from Myers is that now someone's pretty accessible. We tell you that A, it's free for a lot of people, but also they missed the mark. What Myers also says, what Callan says, is that they all, a lot of what we're seeing right now, status quo, is that a lot of first responders are also receiving donations for these things. They completely missed that. But at the end of the day, they themselves can pretty much show the status quo solves, because the NBER evidence at the bottom of their case literally concedes that state laws and the status quo are expanding to provide access. Go to the top to give you reads like this profitability analysis, revenue isn't going to go down. They say, well, even if price goes down, more people can buy it, so we're not going to see a loss of revenue. Medicine is not like other things. It's not like, because you can say, well, medicine's cheaper now, I'm going to try it. You can't do that. You have to actually need it. We say there's a set number of people actually need medicine, so even if you get those people medicine, it's not going to make up for the commensurate decrease in money that you're making. Then, go to our global argument. We get a couple responses here. The first extension we get is that, well, these donations don't work. That can't be true, because it bears out evidence at the bottom of our case tells you that the medicine that we are sending to the developing world has saved 20.3 million people in recent years. The next thing we get is that, well, these free drugs are bad in the long term because they're forming monopolies. But the alternative is way worse. The phage evidence at the bottom of our case tells you that in places like Africa, there is literally no domestic industry, which is why only 2% of all drugs consumed are produced domestically. The alternative is that they literally have no medicine at all. I say literally some medicine is better than no medicine. Then they said that affordability has not changed recently. That's fine because it's already affordable. The forward evidence tells you that in the developing world, they pay 1 to 5% what they pay in Western markets. At that point, you send the middle evidence said that we can only afford to give price concession in the developing world. There's a high prices now, but if you decrease price in the United States, that changes. Landau tells you that decrease the amount of drugs entering the developing world by 30%. Their invite isn't true. That's really important because we're saving 20 million lives. Very simple scope weighing analysis. We affect way more people than they do.
Okay, so let's talk about your second contention on the global crisis.
Okay.
So this Landau evidence,
Yep.
what are you claiming it says?
We are claiming that Landau says because when you have price controls, you are decreasing revenue is much less likely than a existing drug or a new drug. It goes to the developing world. It's exactly
So what does the Landau evidence actually study? Like the Landau evidence does a empirical analysis talking about whether there's delays in launch.
I don't think this is
drugs.
like a productive use of like crossfire
No,
time.
because
Like,
you just said my index wasn't true. It didn't
yeah,
explain anything.
you're in.
No.
The way you
Probability
the way you
of
phrase your
measuring
indict said that a price.
percent.
You said that our evidence says a price control in the developing world has these effects, but the United States is a developing country.
No.
Landau does not say
That's
that
not
price.
it. That's not the index.
So.
But that's what Sandeep
So
said.
we have the Lanzhou evidence, and the Lanzhou evidence studies whether price controls in general
Okay.
cause drugs to be delayed.
This
in
is very
countries.
new.
Really quick.
Your indictment was just saying,
Yes,
Also,
because let
even
me
if
explain this,
even
you're not getting it,
even
bro.
if you want to buy that it's about delays, like you
Yeah.
can't access medicine that is not there, so that's still people who are losing their life during that period
Yeah,
of
but
time.
that's like, you're only
Like, it's
solid
still
evidence
access
is
to
this
all
evidence that it has nothing to do with like U.S. price controls.
Also,
affecting
the mellow
developing
evidence,
countries.
that's also definitely solvency there.
What does mellow say?
Mellow literally says that the
You
only way that we
remove-
finance low prices is by having high prices here. When you remove that, the prices
Here's the
higher.
question on that, right? So what incentive, why do companies right now have an incentive to make money off the developing world?
they do, which is why they are. Like, we are selling,
So
okay, alright. I'm gonna try to explain this. In the developing world right now, there is still profit that can be made. It's not as much as can be made in the developing world because we can charge higher prices here. But if you charge at a relatively low price, there is still a level of money that you can make. Our argument that you can strip the
So-
amount, please let me finish.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
strip the amount of money that they're making. They now spend the finite resource they have to maximize their profit. When I say
So,
they want to
okay, I understand.
maximize their profit
So-
with a finite resource, they're obviously
Okay,
gonna concentrate
okay.
that into the
I
developing world
understand
now.
that. So my question is, how much does revenue of development or like pharma companies have to go down for them to do these things, to trigger impact?
I say it's like directly proportional. Like
It's
like
definitely
does that mean?
scalar.
it's like
Like
So like how much does a
As
1%
as you
impact?
lose more money from the developing world, you no longer can break even with lower profits in the developing world. So like
Yeah, but the
right now, if the
problem-
price that you make in the United
problem-
States goes down, you
Yeah,
also
no.
need to see a proportional
The problem
increase
is
in the
like now we
developing
have
world.
no clue how to contextualize the impact, because they're certainly not getting 20 million people in the developing world since 2000. Because you just said they're still trying to make profits, and it's really just like a scalar impact.
Like they can make a minimal profit in the developing world without charging more price because they have the counterbalance of the United States market.
No,
It's definitely
that's,
true. It's how
That's
it's
all I'm
happening.
saying though. Like,
But-
we moved on from that. It's more about what is your impact now, because it's not the 23 million
I mean, like
people.
it can be any proportion.
well,
of
like
the
I think
23
both
So,
for
yeah.
impact content. We both like state big numbers, but like obviously like the
No,
both
we
are
have
numbers.
direct causal evidence, which shows that, like, the Burke evidence says that naloxone saves 150
And the Burke
people
evidence is
per day.
dependent on the fact that like first responders can't get it, which you still need to win the link too.
Yeah, obviously, but we're talking about impact evidence.
We'll take the 5 seconds. Okay. We're gonna do their case and then our case. Weighing in the middle. Start with the overview that's only addressed in second summary. They just say that there's a set number of people who need medicine, so you don't actually increase access. But in our case, they concede that there are tons of people in the United States who can't afford their drugs, which means overall more people still die, which means overall a 20% decrease in price only decreases revenue by 1%, which basically mitigates their impacts by a factor of 99. That's going to be incredibly important. Don't let them make new responses in second final folks. It essentially takes out all the offense on their second contention. Let's go to that contention now. The first issue is we say that they're always having an incentive to profit off the developing world. So the donations that they say are really bad for these companies because they can only buttress it by investment in the United States isn't actually true. On donations, we tell you that they get tax deductions and they're doing it based on surpluses. So when they have extra drugs in the United States, they just send them over to the developing countries. They don't have to pay the cost for them and they get tax deductions, so it's beneficial for them. On the idea of this essentially decreasing prices, we tell you it's a long-term trend of monopolization because they price out generic manufacturers in the short term, which is why Bouchard tells you that all you see is increased monopolization and access to medicine hasn't changed. The Landau evidence is very specifically talking about when there's been price controls that have been implemented by developing countries, there's been a delay in launches, so that evidence isn't very good. And also when they just say they're impacting to 20.3 million people, we say this is probably the general trend of global development. The access to medicine index evidence that isn't responded to tells you that in the past few years, affordability has not changed. Pharmaceutical companies are not doing the best for the developing world. The weighing is clear on probability. He just says a little bit over time that developing countries are more important because they affect more people. We say probability is way more important than that because you know the 100% probability that lives are dying in the affirmative world, but you have no idea how many drugs you're going to get to the developing country and whether they'll have the infrastructure set up. On our first contention about saving Medicare, they don't extend a link into innovation, which means that they don't win that healthcare costs overall decrease. We still tell you that Medicare is running out of money and price controls will decrease the Medicare budget. On our last contention about the opioid crisis, he just says that they have evidence about first responders. Clearly, it's not enough in the status quo. Even if in the status quo you're increasing access by 11%, we tell you that can be increased to save 100 people per day as the Burke evidence when you decrease the price of naloxone. At the end of the day, we tell you that already you're seeing 11% decrease in deaths as a result of expanded subsidized state budgets. You know the 100% probability you can save hundreds of thousands of lives in the United States, and that's what we think you should do.
Ranting about 45 seconds.
Starting.
start off on the opponent's case on Medicare, realize they never responded to the fact that there's going to be a trade-off with cheaper medicine. There's an increased cost for things like surgeries and visits. That's why the cost of medicine overall isn't going to change. At that point, they don't get access into saving the Medicare budget. They never quantify how much longer we're going to have access to Medicare. Then, going to their second point about opioids. There are two main responses here. One, we say that they're already doing donations to first responders. They say it's not enough, but the point where they literally non-unique themselves by saying that state policies are already really effective, they have very minimal offense in today's round. So, let's go back onto our case. At the top on the overview, they say that there's going to be a 1% decrease in revenue. One, we say that right now, there's already a finite amount of people who have these diseases. They can never prove that they'll be able to make as much profit as they do right now. But secondly, the mellow evidence doesn't even say it profits. It just says if they can't make as much money, they don't see it as profitable to sell there, so they either increase prices or don't sell at all. So, go on to our second contention. He says that right now, donations aren't effective, we're pushing out generics, and there's no increase in affordability. First, on donations. We literally tell you that donations are not everything. Companies still sell into markets of Africa. They get medicine through ways other than just donations. We still access or impact. But secondly, on generics decreasing in the short term, we tell you that we would rather have no industry, we'd rather have industry right now, even if it's monopolized versus no industry. They never give you any empirical evidence that generics are even increasing in the first place. They just posit that is true. Here's how we win the round. We tell you that right now, in Africa, prices are 1 to 5% of the cost in the United States. That's because they are a counterbalance. When I can charge more in the United States for certain products and charge less in Africa for certain products, I can still break through with a marginal profit. But when you decrease the profit from the United States, you either need to offset it with an increase in Africa or no sales at all and going all in. That's why we say there's either a trade-off with price or a trade-off with supply. That's really important because these people in Africa pay out-of-pocket costs. They need access to this medicine. At the point where they would either not have any medicine to buy or that medicine would be more expensive, we say that you put 20 million lives at risk that have been already saved by sales into Africa. Don't risk the current progress. We are the best chance of solving for the most disenfranchised people, and for that reason, you should engage.